Is not just the world's richest man, he is one of the world's most influential people. He oversees a sprawling empire of companies that are shaping the future, touching on clean energy, space exploration, communication, and now artificial intelligence. He is a brilliant businessman and a visionary. He is also reckless, mercurial, at times juvenile, and some say dangerous. The great biographer Walter Isaacson set out to understand this complex figure. Isaacson has written a slew of acclaimed books about different geniuses through history. His new book is titled simply Elon Musk. Walter, pleasure to have you on.
Hey, Fareed, good to be back with you.
So I am somewhat skeptical of the idea that, people's childhood at early ages forever shapes them. But this one seems extraordinary. I mean, he said to you, adversity shaped me. And what he's describing is what you describe as a pretty harrowing childhood.
Right. And people can have perfectly wonderful childhoods and still be great innovators. But there is some correlation, it seems to me, sometimes between, an Einstein or a Kissinger growing up Jewish in Germany, or, Leonardo growing up gay in the village of Vinci and having to leave to Florence. But in this case, with Elon Musk, it was such a brutal childhood in South Africa. Lots of violence. He and his brother Kimball would go to an anti-apartheid conference and concert. The doors of the train would open and there'd just be somebody sprawled there with a knife in the head, and they'd have to step through the pools of blood. And he got beaten up so often because he was very socially awkward as a kid. But the scars really came from his father, who then took the side of the kid who beat Elon up and would make Elon stand there for like an hour and call him stupid. So there's a light and dark side to Musk that is really shaped by the adversity of childhood, as he says.
And, it seems to have produced a kind of punch back hard mentality. His brother describes his fascination with video games, and he says the video games taught him lessons like empathy is not an asset.
Correct.
Play life like a game. Don't fear losing.
And don't unplug, man. He just keeps going to the next level of the game. But even early on, there's something called Veld School in South Africa. It was like a wilderness survival camp that they send kids to. And the first time he goes there, he loses 10 pounds because they keep beating him up, taking all the food. They encourage the kids to fight over the food. Second time he goes, he's gotten a little bit bigger. He said, I learned to punch people in the nose really hard. And they'd still beat me up sometimes. But if I punched them really hard in the nose, they'd remember it. And that's almost a metaphor for now, which is you see him very successful, but he's sometimes eager to punch people in the nose.
Oh, we're going to skip through the career because I want to get at what seemed to me the most fascinating parts of the book. One of his geniuses, it seems to me, is a kind of engineering genius. It's even though he was a physics major, right? I think, but he, like you point out in Tesla, the key innovation might be that unlike every other car manufacturer in the world, he decided Tesla was going to make all its components itself. It was not going to have these hundreds of suppliers. And that is in some ways what has created this kind of complete, almost Apple-like closed universe, right?
Exactly, and it's very much one of the transformations he's caused, because when Tesla was first formed, it was making the batteries in Japan, and the battery packs would be in some barbecue place in Thailand and then go to England to be put in. Anyway, he said, no, you have to do it end to end yourself, and we can manufacture in the United States again. I mean, people at that point in the 70s and 80s, all the car companies had outsourced almost 70% of what they did. And he says that if you manufacture it, if you walk the factory line every day and you make your designers have their desks next to the factory assembly line, then they can iterate hour by hour and see what works. And so to me, one of his strengths, it's not the sexiest thing that makes the tabloids, is the ability to design not just cars, but the factories and assembly lines that make cars, and to show how those are connected.
And in a way, he's also created the model for a Tesla, which is really, it's software on wheels. Right. And the software gets updated like a phone constantly.
Totally. Yeah, and it allows it to totally change. And the big thing that he's aiming for And as usual, he's able to turn the impossible into the very late. It's going to take a while. Is self-driving, the car that drives itself, and that's all a software issue. And one of the big leaps he did right just a few months ago, and sort of near the end of the book, is they had hundreds of thousands of lines of code that taught the car how to drive. See a red light, you stop. See yellow lines, don't cross. Now they're doing it with machine learning, like ChatGPT, generative artificial intelligence, where they're it's filling up the computer with 1 billion frames of video a day of humans driving. So the car learns to do what a human would do in a situation.
And when you look at something like SpaceX, what do you see as the kind of fundamental, kind of genius there?
A lot of it, but let's start with risk-taking. I mean, he sends up the first 3 rockets, they all blow up. And he said, everybody who came to America almost were risk-takers, whether they came on the Mayflower or came across the Rio Grande, but we've lost the talent for being risk-takers. We've got more referees than risk-takers and regulators. So he's willing to try things, and it means that Boeing and NASA have not been able to get, say, astronauts from the US into orbit, into the space station. But he's able to do that multiple times. He's sent up 5,000 communication satellites, which are the only ones that work. And it's that ability to iterate and take risks that I think is just part 1 of the puzzle.
All right, stay with us. When we come back, I'm going to ask Walter Isaacson whether Elon Musk's success has a lot to do with the government, even though he's kind of a libertarian himself, when we come back. And we are back with Walter Isaacson talking about Elon Musk. People now think of Musk as something of a conservative because, right. And certainly a kind of libertarian around COVID, he's had. What I'm struck by is his biggest businesses are all totally dependent on the government. SpaceX, the biggest customers are NASA and the Defense Department. Tesla, without the loan he got, Tesla might not have survived, but more importantly, as a Tesla owner, you get a huge tax credit for buying it. And solar, when he did it, Solar City was entirely based on, again, the federal tax credits, California tax credits. Does he reflect on the oddity of thinking of himself
Well,
as
he
this?
definitely understands the role of the government and is even in favor of regulation, including for AI now. He just went to talk to Chuck Schumer and others in the Senate. But there's a distinction I'm going to try to make here, which is Boeing and other contractors have cost-plus contracts, which means the government pays you, and if you're late, you get more, and you get a guaranteed profit. And if the cost overruns, you actually make more money. What Musk did was says, it's a fee for service. If you want the satellites up, you pay me this much, and I take the risk. And it's a new way of doing business, which means the risk capital came from SpaceX and him, not from the government.
Though the Tesla loan he got from the...
Well, actually, he did not get an auto bailout in those famous auto bailouts.
Right.
He got a Department of Energy loan that was paid back with interest. Not trying to defend it, because I think you're exactly right. Government has to help incent certain types of economic activity, and certainly when it came to the transition of electric vehicles, Musk was right in the fore of that, but there were a lot of government incentives.
Starlink. What I want to ask you about the Starlink case is, so it's now famous because of your book that he told Starlink, the Ukrainians, I won't let you use Starlink in Crimea if you start attacking it. Right. You can use it in Ukraine, not including kind of the parts that the Russians annexed in 2014. You can use the parts they annexed in 2022. The reason he said is because he thought that would cause World War III, that the Russians would respond with nuclear weapons. Well, the Ukrainians found ways to attack Crimea repeatedly, in fact, just last week, and the Russians have not used nuclear weapons. Do you think that, does Elon Musk take feedback that is negative? Does he realize that he was wrong about that?
Well, he does have this apocalyptic view of the world, that anything at any point could just become World War III, go nuclear. And certainly that night in September when he's deciding not to enable Starlink, the Ukrainians don't know it's already been disabled. He thinks that's going to cause World War III. They're going to go nuclear. And in the end, as you say, that wasn't exactly true. But I don't know, you're more of an expert than I am. There was a non-trivial chance that it could have caused a more robust response, but it didn't. Yeah, and so Musk does take feedback, not very well. One of his weaknesses, not enough people telling him no, but at a certain point he takes feedback. You've had Mark Milley earlier on this show. He talks to General Mark Milley. He talks to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and they decide that control of Starlink should now be, some of it, transferred to the U.S. government, so that the U.S. government gets to make the decision on would it be too dangerous to allow it to be used that way. So I watched him over the past few months say, maybe this is too much power for a private citizen like me, and maybe I don't know whether it's going to cause a nuclear war. Let's let the U.S. government do it.
We just have a minute, but I want to ask you, the central question one gets from your Jobs and Musk books is, do you have to be an asshole to be a genius? What do you think?
No. And I wrote, I hope somebody will read it, Jennifer Doudna, The Code Breaker, my last book about the nicest person in the world. And she helps invent this technology called CRISPR that allows us to edit our genes. Huge technology and has the sweetest lab there is. And I think maybe one of your favorites might be Benjamin Franklin, because he's so much like you. Benjamin Franklin is a guy who brings people together. So if you write biography, it's not like you're writing 7 secrets to how to be an effective leader. You're writing about real people, some of whom are kind and gentle, some of whom are rough around the edges, and you let the reader decide, okay, I get it.
Do you know what you're going to do next? We just have a slew of extraordinary books.
You know, I want to always be at the intersection of science, humanities, and technology. And as you know, especially after Henry Kissinger, I go way back in history to and after Steve Jobs, I go back in history. There's a part of me now that wants to go into the Wayback Machine.
The Wayback Machine. Walter Isaacson,
hey,
always such a pleasure. Amazing book. Thanks to all of you for being part of my program this week. I will see you next week.